Good evening. I'd like to call to order the Mundelein Elementary School District 75 board meeting. The meeting will now come to order at 7:03. And Mrs. Fingerhut, could you please call the roll?
DuPont.
Here.
Erickson.
Here.
Fingerhut here. Price.
Here.
Gallegos.
Here.
St. Clair.
Here.
And is Holly online? Or no? Not yet. Okay.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. We have no one in attendance for citizens' comments in the building. So now we'll go to online and welcome everyone there. And we just want to reiterate that the Board of Education welcomes citizen input. Citizens are please reminded to limit their comments to approximately 3 minutes. If you like, please indicate and I can give you a heads up when you have like 10-15 seconds to go, your choice. And also please remember that matters regarding employees, confidential student matters will not be allowed, nor will the board respond. And again, just a reminder for those of you who have never attended, the board will listen to all citizens' comments, take notes, but we generally don't ask questions in return and engage in conversation like a town hall. If you require additional information after your question, please feel free to contact your usual channels for that, your principals, teachers, administrators, and so forth. So with that, we'll check to see who's online, and just a reminder to please, at the bottom of the Zoom screen, click the raise hand icon, and when it's your turn to speak, we'll be bringing you into the live session.
Mary has a question.
Okay, Mary, can you hear us? And please welcome.
She's muted right now.
Okay, there you go. How are you, Mary? Is that you?
Yes, it is. And how it works so that you know is that it spun a little bit and then it said you are now in the meeting. So that's the lag. My question is, I live in the colony of Long Meadow behind Mechanic Grove School. And my question is regarding the solar farm. Can you give me a status on that? I'm also a board member of the Homeowners Association of the colony on Long Meadow.
Contact me tomorrow.
Yeah, can you please, it wasn't a scheduled item on the agenda, so if you could please contact Dr. Meyer, he's more than happy to talk to you about that project.
My understanding is that you can ask a question during the board meeting. And so my question is fair, I think, to the board. What is the status on that?
And I think that's a detailed question that is better served by direct communication at your convenience with the superintendent.
Because you do not want this on record?
No, it's just the protocol around, again, the citizens' comments are for statements, not question, answer, and dialogue. So if you'd like to make a statement regarding the solar farm, we're happy to hear that.
Okay, fair enough. I would like the solar farm to be dismantled. As I understand, it is the company that erected it is in bankruptcy, and it is an eyesore for the neighborhood around it. And I will be happy to contact the superintendent to discuss that further, but I respectfully ask that the solar farm is dismantled.
Thanks, Mary.
We have one more. Dee Barnes.
Hey, Deborah, I understand you're on the phone. When you're ready, please go ahead.
Hi, how are you? I just wanted to provide citizens' comments. I missed the board meeting when you all had discussed the possibility of changing the school times for the 2021 school year. And I was in attendance last night with Dr. Myers, the principal of Carl Sandburg, and the assistant principal, and Stephanie at Washington. But I still don't know if it's been communicated what the impetus for the sudden decision to make a change in the school times. You know, with the lack of research around young children and the sleep needs that they need at this time, I do know that there's been research for, you know, many, many years on high schoolers and middle schoolers. So with most research, and I've got 2 master's degrees myself, you can always find research to support your cause. So if you're looking for research on teenagers needing more sleep, you're going to find the research. Unfortunately, there isn't research, and one of my friends, Nicole Russo Ponceron, is a doctorate in neuroscience and has works with studies at Rush University all the time. And even she said that there's no data to support the young children and their sleep needs. So I'm trying to understand why this year there was a decision to be made to change the school times. I'm not for my child starting school at 7:45 and ending at 2 for a lot of reasons, but mostly I can't get her up at 5:45, 6 in the morning, 5 days a week. She does swim till 7 o'clock at night, so I wouldn't even be able to get her full night's sleep coming home from swimming and showering and then going to bed. So I just want to understand if somebody could shed light on why the decision was all of a sudden made for this particular school year. That's my question.
As we discussed before, the statement, citizens' comments are citizens' comments. So if you would, please feel free after attending the 2 sessions, or viewing the recorded session and then the one you did yesterday, please feel free to reach out again to the administration and Dr. Myers specifically. That follow up.
I'm hoping maybe there could be some message sent out to parents to help us understand why the decision was made for this year. That would be pretty helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, and the superintendent is taking note of that, and
Great.
of course, no firm decision has been voted on or person
Right.
as of yet, so just so you know, that's where we're
Yeah.
at.
I
Okay,
do. Wanted to, I missed the last board meeting, so I wanted to make sure I got my comments into this one. Thank you.
great, Deborah, great to hear from you, take care.
Thanks. You too. Bye-bye.
We don't have it else.
Okay, there's no one else currently raising their hand, but we'll give you a few seconds in case some question, or not question, excuse me, if you would like to make a statement. Okay, and I think we're finished with citizens' comments. Thank you all for your comments, appreciate it. Moving on, before we get to the reports, just wanted to ask if the usual question about board members getting questions answered, and I think the one topic where we have a lot of questions is evolving. So aside from the literacy or the bilingual program, is there any other questions or concerns from the board members on the topics tonight? Okay, so now are we going to keep the same order on the agenda? You want to keep the same order? Okay, thanks, Dan. You're up next, teaching and learning.
Thank you. Good evening, Board of Education. We have 2 updates for teaching and learning. One will be a middle school hybrid update, and I'm going to have Mr. Mark Pilot, principal at the Sandburg Middle School, give us an update on the hybrid program and where we're going with that. And then next, I will come back and give an update on where we are with summer math intervention also for the middle school. So, Mr. Pilot?
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Mark Pilot. I'm the principal at Carl Sandburg Middle School. The hybrid model at Sandburg is up and running. We are in with all our kids 4 days a week, with Wednesday remaining a remote day. Anna, if you would head to the next slide. Thank you. So 4 days a week, Wednesdays remain a remote day. We have a rather consistent schedule going on. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, follow the same bell schedule. It starts at 7:45, ends at 2:35. Wednesday starts at 7:45, ends a little bit later at 2:55. We kept the, if you go to the next schedule or the next slide, here's the Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday schedule. We do have a consistent time in there for help with the Tiger Time, as we explained when we were making the move back to in-person a couple of months ago. And then the Wednesday slide, we kept the same as in remote. Part of that reason is, it's on the next slide, if you would move to that. Part of that reason is simply because with 3 lunch periods running and all of our kids at home on Wednesday, we thought it would just be clean and simple to keep what they were doing in place. We also find it beneficial on those Wednesdays. That's when the staff collaborate and work with each other. It's a large part of the time in the middle of the day to touch base, and we found that beneficial as well. So it's going well. We're at about 61% of our kids in person. So that leaves, 39% at home, fully remote. We are still accepting kids. I believe that's the last slide in this presentation. Is if the families want to make a change, they're welcome to. Depending on transportation, it could take a week, but for the most part, if they don't need a bus to be set up for them and just confirm with the bus company, we can usually get them in place and in the building within the week. But all parents have to do, if they are interested in changing to one model or another, we've only had one student who was in person go back to remote. But everybody else has been a remote to in-person change. If they're interested, all they have to do is they can email me, Mr. Sand, one of the secretaries, the social workers, their teacher, and Diana Solis is our secretary who reaches out to them, gets them the blue card, make sure that everything is in order, that they have transportation, everybody is on the same page, and then we get the kids going and in school. It's been going well. So that's all I have.
So, Mark,
Yes.
just to confirm, it's about a week from the time that they want
Yes.
to come back till the time that they get their bus schedule and
Yes.
everything, it can
Yes.
actually be back in person.
Yes, is if they need a bus.
Okay.
If they just need, if they're driving to school, we can usually get them in within the week. Okay,
And there's,
Yep.
so, like you said, there's about 60-ish%.
Yep.
And I'm assuming then that's using the 3-foot.
yes, that's, yep, we have the 3-foot social distancing in
Right.
place, except in the lunchroom where it's still 6 feet because they removed their masks.
Basically, right, so how much additional, how many percentage students additional could you accommodate? Because there has to be, in a
3 feet.
regular classroom,
Mhm.
would there already be 3 feet
Mhm.
between? students?
What we prep for, so it's funny, I was just referencing this with Dr. Myers earlier this morning. Way back in July, when we put our first proposal forward with all the kids in on their AM, PM, LA schedule, if you'll recall that, we were spaced about 3 to 4 feet apart.
Right.
And so we can get just about everybody in. Now, there have been some move-ins, there's been some schedule changes, so we do have a couple classes that are running at 29. If everybody were to come back and those teachers know, well, 2 things are going on. Some of those are co-taught class, so they would actually split the class and it would be kind of a concurrent with the same class in 2 places, with some of the kids Zooming even in school. Or we would just relocate and set up, like our lunchroom is set up with individual spaces, so we can easily convert that into a classroom for a period.
For a bigger,
So we feel we can have the space to get them all back in, except for a couple of classes that we have to figure out.
very well, thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you very
All
much.
right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mark.
You're welcome.
All right, our next topic is going to be a summer math intervention. And so this was something that the board had mentioned, wanting us to look into. We put our heads together. I think we came up with a really good option for some of our students who are struggling in the hybrid or remote option right now. Our goal, just like our literacy summer school, is to do this in person. So. Oh. Perfect. If you go to the next slide. So one of the ways we're able to do this is with our ESSR, that's the Emergency CARES Act funds that have come through. Right now, we're working on the grant for the ESSER 2. ESSER 3 is sort of on the horizon. We don't have any information on that. We were able to build all of our summer school, including our literacy component that we talked about at the last meeting, into the ESSR grant. This particular intervention will be targeting about 40 to 45 students at the middle school who are currently getting Ds or Fs in their on-level course. So that's the group that we are targeting. Again, we are looking at math only in middle school right now because our focus has been on literacy K through, or pre-K, I should say, pre-K through 8. The departmentalization allows us to do a little bit of this work where we can highlight our math students. What we're going to do is we're going to be joining on with the STEAM Foundation STEAM Camp. And that's where some of these are going to be where this intervention will occur. So it will occur at the high school. And it will occur with robotics as an enrichment. So kids will be working on skill development, but also work on some enrichment with coding and engineering. So if you could go to the next slide, please. It will mirror our summer school dates for literacy. The only difference is that it will occur at the high school. So we're going to be having our middle school math intervention at the high school. Again, it is free to those who have been invited, and transportation will be available to those who qualify. You go to the next slide. You'll see a little bit higher in some of the pieces for getting this up and running. So 2 things to think about. One is the Imagine Math. So one of the pieces of technology that we want to leverage is potentially using Imagine Math. Imagine Math is not new to our district. We haven't used it this year, but it is a program that has pathways that students will go through, and the artificial intelligence part will put the students in the correct area and give them support as needed, or let them continue to move on as needed. Imagine Math, we're going to be signing just a 2-month contract with that if we go with the summer school option. And then we're going to layer on robotics and coding. And right now we're working with RoboThink. RoboThink is a group of robotics teachers. I believe they're in Lake Forest. They used to be in Grays Lake. They are running part of our STEAM camp, and they are working on putting a curriculum together for our students that leverages the engineering and the problem solving to provide some enrichment. So kids are going to be there for 3 hours, but it's not 3 hours of remediation. It's about 50-50. Kids will be able to do some robotics with the RoboThink people. Kids will work with some of our teachers, as well as doing some of their Imagine Math. And again, going back to the Imagine Math, one of the things we really like about Imagine Math is the ability for live teaching to occur through Imagine Math. So when a student struggles in Imagine Math, they get an option. If they struggle for a little bit, I don't know exactly how it works, they get an option to get a live teacher. And so if they're struggling and can't get past a certain point, they click a button, a live teacher can be working with them individually on that particular skill. And so we're adding the transportation as part of our transportation costs. So depending on the number of students that accept the invitation, and depending on the number of students that need buses, That'll give you an idea of the total cost, around 18,500. Again, this is all part of our ESSR 2 grant. And that would be in addition to what we already have in the same grant for our literacy program. Next slide. And with that, I will take any questions.
So the Imagine Math teacher coaching is online versus then you're gonna have two in-person teachers plus the in-person contact through the robots.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, the online Imagine Math teacher, if you will, they're a certified math teacher. That can be accessed during the summer school time, but also if students go home and are working on Imagine Math, there are office hours that are late into the evening. I don't know the exact times, but they have different times for different time zones.
So it's baked into the 3 hours, but then the student and family could opt to do more. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. I think our hope would be that students will go home and do the Imagine Math to give them more time on the robotics, engineering, and coding.
Oh, okay, okay.
That
So
would be our hope.
Like homework, basically. That'll be their summer school homework.
That's their summer school homework, yeah. And so the more that we can do with that, then when they come to school, Imagine Math gives us data that we can use for grouping, gives us math that we can use for remediation, as well as giving them some opportunities to do some different math than maybe they're used to.
You said earlier that there were 40 to 45 kids that this is targeting, but then the math up there was based on 30 kids? Is
Yeah,
that anticipating 15 won't accept? Or is
Well,
it just a guess?
it's based, we'll take, once we get through that initial group, we'll continue to ask kids who are struggling. That's just the number of kids who are Ds and Fs. That's just pulling it from Power School.
Right.
We haven't really put out a email to our staff to say, are there kids who are struggling and could utilize this support? I think just like the literacy, sort of dependent on how many teachers we can get. If we can get 3 teachers and we can get 90 students and we can afford it, we'll support 90 students who want to do robotics and math.
So there's money in the ESSER 2 grant that's going to cover this, whether we end up at 18,500 or something higher, if there are more
Correct.
kids that are at need that
Yes.
accept them. Okay.
Yeah, there is a little bit. I did kind of put a little buffer in there for us.
Okay.
And then it's part of a larger package in that grant that has our literacy. It actually has a little bit extra because we ended up moving the kindergarten readiness piece that was originally going to be part of summer school. We moved that into Title IV. So that opened up some money for additional summer school as well.
Can you remind me what grades is a literacy one that we did last month?
Literacy is going to be kindergarten through 8th grade.
It is also through 8th grade. So the middle school will have both.
Correct.
options. Okay.
When we think about coming back in the fall with the unfinished teaching and learning that is occurring because of the pandemic, that's where we have the least time to intervene. We have the most time with our younger students. And so we believe that we'll be able to catch our students up when they're younger, and then in the older students, just prepping them to be ready for the high school at some point.
And just the way this is set up, it's not possible for a middle school student to participate both in literacy and in math, but they would be invited for basically one or the other.
Right
Is that
now,
correct?
correct.
If we do have room to grow that number to 90, like you said, is it still gonna be by invite only, or is it gonna be?
The robotics program is open to, the STEAM camp is open to everybody already. Basically, what I worked with Tony Cho on this, and to say, how do we earmark a certain part of the day and the STEAM camp, because STEAM camp actually runs 8 weeks, I believe, that can be focused on the math intervention. And that's how we kind of got latched on with RoboThink. And they're, again, trying to customize for the needs of our students. Thank you very much.
If we could, Kevin's not with us on video, he's by a phone, so he did join at 7:22. Log that note, please.
Are we gonna jump then, obviously, to the superintendent's report?
Close, I'm throwing a curveball.
Oh,
No, we're still gonna stick with student
city
services.
service, okay.
But we thought it was appropriate. Certainly, we have a number of questions that we want to be able to go through. And the linguistics summary, we did have action listed on there for this evening. And based off the feedback from everybody, we are asking that as a board that you postpone any action in regards to the linguistics program, because we want the opportunity tonight to go back through some of the questions you have, you be able to hear the presentation. And know that as we go through this, I understand in my part, can bring things back to the board more frequently than what we have, to make sure you feel that you're informed in the process. So definitely appreciate getting questions that are posed prior to board meetings, because it does help us for when we get to the day of the event. So thank you very much for that. And I will hand it off now to Mr. Carlo.
All right, thank you, and thanks for giving me this opportunity to present to you about our linguistic program task force findings. I'm here today with Dr. David Nieto. Dr. Nieto is an assistant professor of the College of Education at Northern Illinois University. Prior to joining NIU, David was the executive director of Bueno Center for Multilingual Education at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's worked in the field of bilingual and migrant education, worked on policy and research in the areas of educational policy, language, equity, and in particular policies, programs, and practices that shape the education for our cultural and linguistically diverse students. In addition to teacher prep and leadership in bilingual education, he also is the current program chair for the second language research SIG at the American Education Research Association. He has a passion for working with teams like ours and culturally diverse students and culturally diverse populations. So I just wanted to introduce Dr. Nieto, who assisted us in the facilitation of our work together this school year and looking closely at our two-way immersion program. So he's with me. So I will do a lot of the beginning slides and then I'll transfer over. We're going to tag team through the slides. So thanks, David. All right. So the next slide. So today, the pieces of our, the components of our presentation to you today include the rationale for our work, the composition of our task force, the purpose of the work, the timeline that we followed, observations that came through the work of the task force, recommendations, and potential next steps. So when I started here in 2019, I had lots of great opportunities to work, honestly with staff and get feedback from staff along the way. Staff of all types, from our teachers to our paraprofessionals to our administrators. And we learned a lot about within our dual language program or our two-way immersion program, that while there's so much passion and so much dedication and so many great things happening, there were some questions or concerns around the program clarity. And that really fell within just the different types of different types of professional development models that our staff is being trained with. So for example, there's teaching for biliteracy and biliteracy from the start, and they all kind of handle the bridging and transference of language differently. And we kind of were transitioning between those in the midst of the first 3.5 years of our program. So different staff is being trained in different models. So that was something that we heard about with our program clarity, as well as how that related to our mission and vision, and just when we set the stage for the program when it initially started. There were questions surrounding, and I apologize. In addition, I wanted to mention that during that time, as we've talked about before in front of the board, we had during the course of these 5 years, we've had 5 total, if you go back to the inception and the planning, different administrators that have kind of touched or overseen part of the dual language programming. So again, the staff looking for that clarity and consistency. Resources, the availability of resources and equity of resources was something that had been coming up relatively consistently. Professional development, as I mentioned earlier, for our two-way immersion staff and beyond our staff, but just our school district as a whole, like understanding more about our English learner population. And then as we talked about in some of our opportunities together, just our overall student performance and growth. Next slide. So our task force was comprised of some of our leadership that you see there on the left-hand side, all of our building principals and one of our assistant principals, and working with our administrators, and based on staff interest, we were able to have a nice abundant group of staff that worked with us with every building represented. So we had our bilingual coach, and then we had representation from Lincoln, Washington, Mechanics Grove, and Carl Sandburg, as you can see. And we had 2 of our parents who actually are help assisting us with lunchroom supervision and things like that. So they work with us, alongside us, and then also are parents of our linguistically diverse students. So they were a part of our committee as well. This is the composition of our task force. And the great thing, before we go to the next slide, is that these individuals were able to work together in small groups during all of our task force meetings to provide input to myself and Dr. Nieto and the whole leadership team in our reflection and process as we plan for each meeting. Next slide, please. So the purpose of our work when we initially started together was to really look at our dual language program and look at our current practices and best practices and, you know, cutting edge, like I gave the example earlier about biliteracy from the start and teaching for biliteracy kind of being two different foundational philosophies, and looking at where did we want to be so that we could eliminate that confusion and provide more clarity for our staff and our teams and our students. So we wanted to do that through this process and also learn about potential enhancements to the program and make potential recommendations to strengthen the program in our community. Next slide. So prior to October, actually Dale Truding was instrumental in supporting me in this. We had the opportunity to interview several potential task force facilitators, ultimately determining going forward with Dr. Nieto. And then our administration team got together on October 30th to kind of outline the work that we wanted to do, the questions we wanted to ask. Of course, seeking additional input from staff. We had a bilingual coffee again to figure out what we wanted to look at. And then the task force met on all the dates you see there. Pretty much it averaged out to once a month for 5 sessions. And then here you see all the focus groups that we were able to conduct where Dr. Nieto was able to meet with different members of our stakeholder groups. So in doing that, and then also was able to do some observations in December, and I think I cut that off of the slide accidentally, but also do some observations in some classrooms via Zoom in December. So this was essentially the work in each of these sessions of our task force. We had anywhere from 2 to 4 hours a session. So it was some very deep and thorough work and lots of reflection. So it was really beneficial to all of us that participated. Next slide, please. So again, we're going to go through the findings of the report. And again, I just want to reiterate that what was really advantageous to us is that in the structure of our task force, for each topic, whether it was instruction, materials, philosophy, mission, vision, all the different components that we looked at, what we would do is we would have the opportunity to break out into small groups, read research, reflect, discuss that research. Sometimes we would get the research, you know, from the session before, come back together, discuss best practices, and really in mini groups kind of make recommendations and then come all together. So it truly was a stakeholder process in the sense that it wasn't just myself and Dr. Nieto, you know, kind of creating a plan for the district. It really involved the input of everyone that served on this task force. So that was really an exciting process for us. Next slide, please. So we looked at our current mission and vision, and we looked, and again, having heard from our staff that there was, you know, not a lot of consistency or clarity in some of the pieces of our programming. So we looked at our mission and vision, and then we also looked at example mission and visions for programs that serve linguistically diverse students. So what you see here is what we drafted together in our group. And so this includes kind of some of the additions or components that were considered to, as far as being a little bit different from what we had previously. We talk about culturally sustaining content instruction in Spanish and English. So that culture piece, and then also that continuing within our staff and community to recognize, honor, and celebrate the personal, linguistic, ethnic, racial, and cultural backgrounds and identities of our students in their homes and within their community, and to honor that. And then also, as you can see within our vision, we talked a lot about wanting our students to develop to their academic, social, and linguistic potential. So again, this was through the work of our group. And next slide, please. All right, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Nieto for the next bit of slides here. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight, although it feels a little bit like Groundhog Day, right? Like with the snow back outside this morning, feels like going back to winter. But I appreciate the opportunity to present the work that we've been doing the past few months with the task force in the district. Before I go into the findings, I want to reiterate what Mr. Carlo was talking about in terms of the findings and how we proceeded, because our plan was twofold. On the one hand, we used a rubric published by the Center of Applied Linguistics, which is the guiding principles for dual language education, which is one of the most prestigious rubrics. And as a task force, we had the opportunity to go through each of the strands in the rubrics, sort of like evaluating the program as currently is. And you can access that rubric online if you like. And the second part was me meeting with every stakeholder in the district separately by myself, so that they could speak freely about what they believe were the strengths and the opportunities in the program as they currently is. I'm happy to share also with the board sort of the procedure that I followed to code and synthesize the data that I obtained, and I presented back to the task force, and we had a decision-making process in which we all contributed, and all of these recommendations were reached by consensus. I have to say, I think that I have to honor the hard work that every member in the task force did during these past few months, and that I do thank them for that work. So let's go through each of the findings in each of the areas that we reviewed. And the first one was program structure. And this is what we perceived of the program as it currently is. We will talk of recommendations later on. So just to contextualize this initial finding, there are 4 critical goals of two-way dual language programs that are recognized by the literature, by the experts in the field. And these are bilingualism and biliteracy, high academic achievement in 2 languages, sociocultural competence, and equity. Those are the 4 pillars of dual language education. And in our findings, we identified that the district was well acquitted with the first 2, bilingualism and biliteracy, and high academic achievement in 2 languages. But there was some confusion about what it meant to develop a strong sociocultural competence in students, and to provide a framework for equity in the program. We also noticed, and this is actually not particular of the program in Mundelein, but this is something that it's been observed in 50-50 models, that a two-way 50-50 two-teacher model does not allow really for the maximization of the benefits of two-way dual language programs, and sometimes creates some redundancy in instruction, meaning that sometimes teachers tend to teach the same content twice, and that's not that obviously takes away instructional time from focusing in other areas. Also, when we started this work, there was not a single individual, one person, one dedicated person to take charge of the program itself. And we noted that it is essential, right, to create this atmosphere of collaboration and understanding, advocacy for the program, and especially to oversee the functioning, that things are going well in a two-way dual language program. So that was missing at that point, that dedicated person. We can go to the next slide, please. In terms of curriculum, we observed that there were several changes in curriculum, and staff, faculty, leadership reported those, that there were several curricular adjustments and changes, but that those had resulted in some confusion in terms of the application of these curricular changes. We also noted that translation had been used profusely in the curriculum. And I just want to point out that translation is not really a good instructional approach. Languages have particularities that cannot be really translated. And although we can build bridges between languages, it's important to keep authenticity in the language resources we use in one language and also in the other, right? Also, we realized that there was not a full alignment, both horizontally across languages, right, or vertically across grade. and that was coordinated with services beyond the classroom, like some other support services, like special education, for example. And we noted that, but that was not completely done. Can we go to the next slide, please? In terms of instruction, and I report in the report that you have available, I comment on some of the limitations in terms of the instruction, especially given the pandemic this year. But what I basically say is that the alignment, right, and this is partly also a result of that confusion in the curriculum, that the alignment between English and Spanish was not clear in the instruction that was presented by the teachers. We also thought that the use of technology could be enhanced in the lessons that were being taught. And finally, that there was a general sense that the metalinguistic approach and the methods that teachers were using in a two-way dual language program, especially when there was this high collaboration, could be enhanced. I just want to clarify, because sometimes, we use this type of jargon like metalinguistic. Metalinguistic may appear later in the presentation, and whenever I refer to metalinguistic, I'm talking about the awareness that the structures of language between English and Spanish, their commonalities are their differences, and how teachers sort of refer to those in their instruction. Can we go to the next slide, please? We also looked at staff quality, professional development, and resources. And the first thing that we noticed is that there's a strong commitment among leadership and staff. There's no doubt about that. I can testify to that. But there's also a high turnover rate, which represents another set of challenges, right, of onboarding new faculty, staff, and leadership. And getting acquainted with the program and the district itself. Also, there's a varied understanding of language practices in two-way dual language programming. So, and this represented a challenge, right? Because some of the staff, the leadership, were more advanced, and others were catching up, and that represented some disconnections, in the implementation of the program itself. And finally, we noted the limited access to resources in terms of partnerships, collaborations, looking for external resources for the program. I'm gonna make oh, sorry, I was forgetting about family and stuff. Yes, let's go to the next one. Thank you. You were ahead of me. I was thinking that we were done with the findings, but no, and these are important as well. Maybe the most important ones. We also talked to families and to the community. Both in English and in Spanish, we did these focus group interviews with families, and we found that there was a overall greater satisfactions from English-speaking families. The Spanish-speaking families were happy with the program, but they were more hesitant about how they felt about it, especially with Spanish-speaking families. They referred to some lack of clarity in some of the communications, not necessarily because they were not using Spanish in the communications. The district is indeed using Spanish in communication with families, but sometimes in a language that was not readily accessible to them. They were not sure what it meant. And also on both groups of families, there was a limited understanding about how the program should work. They knew that technically their children will be bilingual and biliterate at the end of the program, but they were not sure how these the aspects of the programs actually work to make that happen, and how to contribute to the program as well, I should say. Well, I want to take a brief pause at the end of our findings in case there are any questions in particular to these findings, or something that may need clarification.
Can you explain what the lack of resources and partnerships entails on the prior slide?
Yeah, I was basically referring then maybe I should have used a better word than resources. I'm basically discussing talking about the partnerships in the districts, like partnerships with institutions of higher education, with external organizations that represents dual language programs. There's a national dual language organization that the district could be accessing. This kind of partnership, this kind of resources is what I would be referring to.
And one of the pieces we talked about in our group was working with like our high school students that are bilingual within Mundelein High School, for example, and then maybe and eventually coming through the two-way immersion program. And then if they decide or determine that they would like to become educators, kind of working through that mentorship process. And the really beautiful thing about this is earlier in our time, that's really where our conversation was, that was absent. And then in working actually at the initiation of Jill Unger, one of our assistant principals, we now are working through a partnership with the high school to create an actual like course projection at the high school where our students who are bilingual would then have access to kind of a pathway to come back and student teach. So that was one piece. And then like Dr. Miyako said, like working more with our universities to send us student teachers who are bilingual in bilingual programs and things like that, and then fostering those relationships. So that's something that we just want to enhance. So.
Has the research changed since we implemented the program or created the program here 5 years ago? And I wasn't part of the, I don't know, not all of us were part of the board at that point. So what went into deciding a 50-50 program then that the research is not showing that that's what we're being told now? Sure.
So Dr. Nieto, you want to take the part about the research and then I can try to do the history?
Sure. Well, first I have to say that there's nothing wrong with a 50-50 model, and we can discuss that later, right? But it's also fair to admit that 50-50 are not that common. The most common version is 90-10. And what the research typically shows between the two models, right, is that the higher exposure to English in 50-50 model does not necessarily increase both the literacy in English and the academic achievement, but it has an effect on the acquisition of the partner language. So students in a 50-50 model tend to be less proficient in Spanish than students in a 90-10 model. So the large majority of dual language programs are actually 90-10, and they follow a schedule in which they go reducing the instruction in Spanish little by little through every grade until they achieve a partnership around 5th grade of 50-50. And students in 90-10 continue to have the same or higher outcomes, both in English literacy and in content, as students in a 50-50 model. So technically, implementing a 50-50 model really may be done for specific constraints within, which I don't know if this is what happened in the district, so I don't want to hypothesize. I was not part of the implementation part or that decision making, but technically it happens when there are some constraints or limitations, for example, around finding faculty that could be part of a 90-10 model, right? That could teach in that model, or whatever other curricular constraints that the districts may have. And that's why they implement a 50-50. If not, they go for the 90-10 generally because of those higher results, especially around Spanish or whatever the partner language is.
And so, like,
is there not license or certification for dual language as opposed to bilingual?
So for your
teachers?
you would have a PEL to be bilingual. So you need your PEL that you can teach in bilingual education. So not all teachers, so even if like I speak Spanish, let's say, I may not have that certification. So it's like a separate pathway. And then there's the ESL certification. And at the time we had a lot of ESL teachers where we're going that way. So that was great success that we were getting more of our staff ESL certified, but we didn't have a lot of Spanish speaking that would pass that Spanish proficiency test and become and take that coursework. So that was,
you want to take the,
yeah, so that
was the primary, I mean, and other districts around us had tried to find qualified dual language staff and could not. There was even a district nearby that recruited people from Spain to come in and try to do it, and that didn't work out well either. So this was a way, by having a two-teacher model, to have some type of dual language program to address the needs primarily of our non-English speaking students more. And then the other benefit, which I'm a little used to add about if we move to a materially different one, is that for those that were primarily English speakers, you had the benefit of having all a reasonably large portion of the students interacting on an ongoing basis with those who weren't English speakers. I guess that's, actually, are you familiar with the Houston Systems evaluation of their, and they seem to indicate that, actually their 50-50 model has better results than their, and they have a number of different types of models. So I don't know. I'm confused at that.
So can I make one clarification
Yeah.
real quick before you answer that? So Wells, when you reference the students being together, so the bilingual students and the students who may have more Spanish spoken at home and the students that have English spoken at home, we're not suggesting any changes to that. We're still suggesting that the student demographic in the classrooms remain 50% and 50%. Like that's always our goal. So that's not what that's not the recommendations or the findings from this report. The recommendations are related to the linguistic allocation in the classroom. So the instruction being taught 80 or 90% of the time in Spanish. So yeah. so I
Appreciate
just-
that, but
yeah.
at this point, our parents that are the English historic speakers, if you will, have to opt in, right?
Right.
Okay, so if I am a family that speaks English only at home, you're going to request that I go into a classroom that has 90 or 80% of the content in Spanish. I think that's going to be a tough sell, although I did finally figure out why that might make sense. I think, you guys tell me, is people that are younger are more likely to be able to easily acquire language skills than old people like me. So, so at least I have a sort of a, the synapses aren't as well formed, so you can adapt them more easily, I think. So, I mean, it kind of makes some sense, but that's gonna be a tough sell.
So taking that a step further, since we don't have any idea yet what parents might opt to do, let's assume it's less than the number that do now. Maybe it's a significantly amount less, maybe it's not, but then the classrooms would be constructed based on that new interest number. So now we have, what, 6? Or say we have five classrooms.
sections of
Four.
dual language.
Okay. So maybe after this is all said and done, we end up with 2 or 3 or something less than we currently. So that's a possibility, right?
It's a possibility. I'll tell you that,
Well, but you can't, because then you're gonna have more than 50 non-English speakers in
Right,
that
right. So
classroom.
that's kind of
well, we
like,
already, so it ebbs and flows when you have, like, if someone comes out of the program or moves
Yeah,
in.
but
and-
that's on the margin,
yeah.
not
Yeah,
double.
yes, so what, to your point about the, how would parents feel or opting in, just as an example, Hawthorne School and Diamond Lake District, so both nearby, they start their kindergarten at that 80-20. So it is more common and, we would, the
It is now,
parent
yes.
education and those pieces in, for example, my son, he was in 90-10 when he was in kindergarten. Now, I had the benefit that I'm fluent in Spanish, so that was
Right.
an angle that I had, but working through, getting the copies of the homework home in English and Spanish so that the parent could support and see the English side and the Spanish side, or dial a friend, that was always the thing. But yes, there are those components to make sure that parents are well aware of like what that composition of that day would look like, absolutely.
so you had mentioned how other districts around us, and I think there's a complete list you had added, so
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Well,
So-
no, but it's not super complete because it was just in the
Well,
last 24 hours, but I
yeah,
can get you a
Well,
longer
understood, but
list.
it's a good sample.
I can get you a
You
longer
have a
list.
great sampling. So my question is, do you know those neighboring schools, are they still having the recruiting issues that Wells referred to that they were having like 5 years ago. So has there been do you have any feedback on that about, they may have the programs, but are they still struggling? And if not, what's different? Plus, I would imagine your suggestions about getting the pipeline in relationships would probably help alleviate that. So are those schools doing that and finding that successful?
So yeah, so the recruitment of staff, is always, when you have specialty areas, what we call like unicorn, like a special educator that speaks Spanish, is like a unicorn type of a position. So the recruitment is always challenging. What we are finding is that more and more students are going and studying the bilingual education because dual language is more and more prevalent in the schools. So as far as, I didn't ask that specific question when I called around to some of our area districts, like if they're specifically feeling a hit if they're doing like the 80-20 or the 90-10. I didn't ask that question specifically, but having worked in districts that had 80-20 or 90-10, it was, we had a successful attrition rate to like get and maintain our teachers. So that had been my experience, but I can research that further as well.
Well, and then the next kind of thought I had too is like, okay, so we're competing for the same talent that these other schools are. And then, kind of like we were doing with the substitute teacher pay, we reacted because we could afford it to up that rate. But, this is a little different and a little more substantial potentially. It's just another feature.
Yeah.
And that's kind of why I asked the question about cost projections. Obviously, you can cost materials, you can cost, curriculum, guides and all those sort of things, but how, again, easily can we get the talent and what would we have to pay for it to keep that, again, so it's another component of over time. I know the first year, you're just looking at a few teachers at the kindergarten is a phased in, if I understood it correctly.
yes,
So,
phased in.
I guess there's time to build that, but it's still.
Well, and Jamie, we did have a conversation. You did talk about that you have been doing some forward thinking and planning in regard to that. Not that you can promise anything, but because that was one of my, rather than just looking at this fall, I'd rather look at what does this look like by switching, if we do that, switching the program from the 50-50 model we have now to something else, whether that's 80-20, 90-10, something else. What does that, what are we signing up for and committing to? Because we do have now next year tweet going up to 5th grade and beyond is the hope. So what are we committing to moving up slowly through the ranks?
And when we look at our staffing as it is currently, every year we look at what are the certifications of our staff and where, what makes the best sense for our stakeholders, for our students, for our staff, and what movements need to happen. So that's definitely something that we've considered. And then also with our grade levels, when you look at if we were to transition to this type of an allocation, that would impact kindergarten, first, second, third, and then you could actually, in the recommendations, you'll see there's a recommendation at 4th grade for 60-40. You could look at, some districts by 4th grade, it's 50-50, or you could look at doing 60-40 if at some point we were able to, if someone in the arts, like arts or PE were to, go move out of state. And so we had a vacancy. If we're to fill that with a bilingual staff member, now we can have a special class. That's what I call it. The special class could then be in Spanish. So then you're kind of looking at how does that 60-40 work or 50-50. So what you'll see tonight is a recommendation in terms of those percentages, but those could be adjusted and adapted. So we're not talking about impacting every grade level. So it's a smaller number of grade levels. But that's a great question.
So I had one quick question,
Sure.
and it was something that I had heard a few times during the presentation of the findings, that we lack a director, right? And there has been a lot of turnover in this program. So I wanted to ask, do you think that a lot of these issues with like curriculum and the communication to our teachers and all that, do you think that having a director would definitely solve a lot of those issues that we have had? Somebody who's there and is in that place where it provides more consistency.
Absolutely. So I think that well, we've all had, the best of intentions, but like, so for example, in my role, I have the EL, so I'm technically serving as the bilingual director on record and working with the staff and helping facilitate some of the, but I also have the special ed and the other pieces, so, and that has been consistent if you go back through the years, like depending on who oversaw it, they were either also a principal or also another director, or like had different roles in the district, because with your gracious like support, we have acquired Mr. Ryan Zach, who will start with us July 1st. He is dedicated specifically to our linguistic programs for the district. So this is his day to day, breathe it in and out all day long, start to finish, meet with teams regularly. We envision that weekly, he will be able to meet with each two-way immersion team on a weekly basis and be their person, their go-to. So absolutely.
Yeah, because I mean, like one thing I'm looking at, one of the things that was mentioned was, different teachers using different models because they were taught on different models. And then also, I'm looking at like right here, like the family and community engagements and people not understanding how it works. Well, we ourselves don't even know how it works. Right. And so I think that having a director that's clearly articulating that, I think would definitely alleviate a lot of these findings that are, I guess, negatives as of right now.
And
So regular education.
for clarity, I know all of us sitting here know that, but we did a few board meetings ago approve that position. So that is going to be a change this next school year that has been approved, but it's not
Absolutely.
yet in action. So that is something that is already
Very
on the
exciting.
horizon,
Yep.
but and that is part of this task force that you're doing.
So related to that, does that job description include evaluations?
Evaluations of staff.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's a good question too. Like, does somebody need to revisit, like you said, the job description or whatever? Because we want to set him up for success, not, give him.
Well, but those persons also report to the principal, correct?
I'm sorry?
The dual language staff
Yeah.
that implements dual language.
And you mean the teachers in the
The
building?
teachers
Yeah.
in the building, yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, that's accurate. So they would be able, so basically, so I've been in, as an example, so evaluated a teacher at one of the buildings this year, but worked in conjunction with the principal to talk about my observations. The principal gave me input and we kind of collectively worked through that process of that evaluation. So that's kind of what you mean. So it is a collaborative process, but yes, you could absolutely assist and support the evaluation process, both directly as the primary evaluator or as an assist. So that's still to be finalized what that would look like. But yes, absolutely. Would it be all right if we move into the recommendations? Because a lot of it's related to a lot of things we talked about already. Okay, great. Thank you. Dr. Nieto?
Thank you so much. I just want to say one thing you said as a little segue into our recommendations, and I apologize because I forgot the name of the gentleman that made this comment about potentially the lack of interest of families, in a program that provides 90% of the instruction in Spanish. And what I can say anecdotally, both in Illinois, but nationwide, there's a waiting list in these programs from English-speaking families. So I do not anticipate that that's going to be an issue. And actually, in a 50-50 program, one of the, in the conversation with families, something that it was actually moving to them because this doesn't seem natural, is like their little people suddenly talking in Spanish in the house when no one speaks Spanish in the house. So we will talk about a little bit later in the recommendations, but one of the things about the lack of clarity about how the program works in families is precisely refers to that. And they suddenly see how their children speak Spanish and they don't, and then the second sort of issue that we will talk in our recommendations, how we potentially can address that, is that they feel that they cannot support the academic development of their children, obviously, because they don't speak Spanish and their children are talking to them in Spanish, right, with some of the homework that they do. So, but in any ways, let's go a little bit into the recommendations. So based on what we just discussed, here are some of the recommendations that, again, were reached by consensus in the task force, and that we feel honored to be presented to the board tonight for your consideration. And The first one is to that the district as a whole identifies as a dual language district. And there's an acknowledgement that not all of the students are part of the dual language program, and they will not be part of the dual language program, all of the students. But I think that this is a step that is critical to emphasize the values of multilingualism, multiculturalism, equity, and justice that dual language embodies. And this is sort of the presentation of the district as a dual language district. Also, we recommend that as another step, together with this one, that the district enhances this vision of multilingualism and multiculturalism and equity in the district, sort of like in a revision of the physical structures, for example, of the district, that both languages are present, and give even a little more relevance to Spanish in the buildings. That also we ensure that both in academic and social events, both languages are always present, that professional learning is granted to staff in both English and Spanish, and that the district outreach and dissemination efforts are also in both languages. Can we go to the next slide? This is our third recommendation. And this is the implementation that we are recommending, the 90-10 model that would start in pre-K, although I've been told that pre-K already is actually above the 50-50 threshold. And here, this is a representation of how it works. So Spanish will be taught 90% of the time in pre-K through first grade, and English that 10% time, which is enough to for students to make the connections between the two languages, especially around literacy. In second grade, as you can see, the percentages are reduced on Spanish in 10% and augmented in English in 10%. The same thing in third and fourth grade until we reach parity in fifth grade, 50-50%. We also made recommendations for middle school, which are 30% in Spanish and 70% of the content be provided in English. And also we made a few suggestions for consideration in high school, especially around some specific content areas to be delivered in Spanish, such as AP courses, but also something about history, social science, etc. Excuse me. Also, we recommended that the district develops clear guidelines to articulate the mission and vision that we presented, but also the core principles that drive the two-way dual language program in Mandolin, that also clarify enrollment of students, how this process happens, how we select students in the districts, that also speaks to the support services for students with disabilities that we recommend not to be excluded, and that's clearly in the report, if you've read it, not to exclude them from consideration into the dual language program. Actually, they can be successful unless they have a severe disability around speech. That would be the only limitation for students with disabilities. Otherwise, we recommend that they still be considered for the program and they can be successful. Also, that in these guidelines and this protocol, that it clarifies the assessment in both languages, how we're going to be ensuring that that our students are performing both in English and in Spanish, linguistically and academically. And finally, that also serves as a marketing and outreach tool for those interested in the program. Hopefully that will serve as guidelines for others, right? That this may become a program that it's actually an example in the area. We recommended also at the time, although we acknowledge that this has already happened, but one of our strong recommendations was to hire a bilingual director and that she or he would establish the planning, the development, and the continuous evaluation of the program itself. We also recommend, and we understand that there is a process that is ongoing about this as well. We recommended the development of a rigorous, standards-aligned, two-way dual language curriculum. And when we discuss standards aligned, this is what we mean, that is aligned to rigorous standards for English literacy, for Spanish literacy, for content, and for language development. Those 4 areas are essential if we want our students to progress and succeed and excel in a two-way dual language program. And obviously, this curriculum must reflect these principles of dual language education that we've been discussing. And we wanted to highlight the social cultural competence component in this case. Together with the curriculum, we also recommend that instructional practices are enhanced and that we help teachers develop strategies in integrating language and content effectively and incorporate some of the cross-linguistic strategies that have shown a promising evidence of success with students in two languages. And finally, that they use strategically the use of oral language, oral development in two-way dual language programs. Delving deeper a little bit into professional learning, and we want to highlight that some of these recommendations are for leaders and teachers in the district in general, but the areas that we observe that need more attention in terms of professional learning are, in the one hand, multiculturalism, language diversity, implicit and explicit bias for dual language contexts. And this is for basically all leaders and teachers in the district. We also think that there's a need to provide professional learning around effective strategies for literacy development in two languages. And that within this category, we include a specific section to be taught in Spanish for teachers that teach in Spanish. It's necessary that these teachers understand how to connect Spanish, in this way, metalinguistic structures. I apologize again for the jargon. We're referring again to the linguistic structures in Spanish and how to connect them to English. And finally, we also recommended to do some professional learning around curriculum development, especially about developing curriculum units and lesson planning and the integration of two-way dual language structures in those. We also recommend to complete an inventory and an evaluation regarding the literature and other resources in Spanish, and that other resources are identified and made available to teachers as necessary. Also, we recommend that the district review their hiring practices, and maybe it would be helpful to engage in a brief study about best practices to attract, retain, and recruit and retain dual language teachers. And I appreciated the conversation before around sometimes it's hard to do, so this is necessary, but also to develop a multi-year staffing plan to ensure that this transition that will happen little by little is successful. We also recommend, and it was part of our conversation before, to strengthen these partnerships with institutions of higher education. This would facilitate the creation of Grow Your Own Teacher programs, which solve some of those difficulties with finding teachers. And this basically means partnering with organizations that would develop either paraprofessional or other support staff in the district, and also high school students, and that they could be actually following the process of obtaining a dual language professional educator license. That's how we call it in Illinois, the PALS. But also these institutions would provide ongoing research-based professional learning activities, coaching, etc. And finally, we recommend establishing a family committee for dual language program. And this will help us in two ways. On the one hand, we will take advantage of the linguistic and cultural resources of both groups of families. So we would encourage families also to understand each other in this process, not only that their children are exposed to the language and culture, which is must happen, but families as well understand the language and the culture of the other, of the partner language. But also it will serve as a motivation and for families to be involved. Also, it will be a source of understanding of how to help the students in this new academic setting, how to contribute, for example, if they want to help them with homework, right? And ultimately, this will be a catalyst for student performance. These are our recommendations, and give it back to Jamie for the next steps.
We wanted to kind of like pull out the things that we're already in progress about, or the things that were more timely. First, the hiring of the bilingual director. So again, thank you so much. We're super excited, and I have the opportunity to speak with Mr. Zach on a very regular basis. And so it's been great. And we're really excited to have him on board. He's visited a few of our schools, and will visit the remaining 2 soon. Creating and aligning curriculum maps. So this has been a great journey this school year. So with the work that our school-wide consultants, Pat, Erica, Jason, and along with Dale Truding, have been working on. Okay, let me take a step back. When we started the school year, and even last spring, we looked at how, again, we have the passion amongst our teachers, but kind of that clarity in terms of what is that scope and sequence, or what is that curriculum map on what we want to cover in literacy at what point in time. So that's something we needed, right? We knew we needed it. And so from the English side, or the English only type of instruction, we had the consultants kind of working on what that looked like, and collaborating with our teacher leaders and our administration on what that could look like. And then we also needed that for two-way immersion. So a really beautiful thing came together in November. We were able to start collaborating together so that what we've developed, and it's almost ready to be unveiled, and most of the grade levels are done, is a curriculum map or a curriculum sequence that incorporates what needs to be done on the TWE side, you know, with English and Spanish differentiation, and what would be done in a classroom that's English only, so that our themes are consistent. We don't have that right now. We don't have, like, you have a TWE program and we're covering different themes. It's not necessarily the exact same thing, same themes or topics that are happening at the same time in the English. So this was an opportunity to really build that together with that understanding of linguistic development and what that looks like, and the content literacy and all those pieces. So it's been really cool to see the team work together. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if this was a model that other districts wanted to look at in the future, because we literally have curriculum maps developed for every single grade level that takes into consideration our English language learners, our English dominant students, and then students that are outside of a TWE program in like a monolingual setting. So it's all accounted for in very clear maps, which I think will be of a huge support relief in terms of what our teachers have been craving and asking for, is that clarity and that scoping sequence and that planning for the year. So again, we have in fact a meeting Friday to compare them all together and get ready to kind of set our communication plan with our schools and our teachers. So we're super excited about that. Professional development, just continued professional development, all the elements we talked about in the presentation. But this summer, for example, once we have that clarity of those maps, the staff has them in their hands. There are a few days planned throughout the summer to work with Adelante Consulting, myself, Mr. Zach, with our staff on that preparation for next school year to get ready to use those curriculum maps and have that instruction, that better understanding of what that bridging looks like and what is taught in English and what is taught in Spanish. The implementation of those time allocation recommendations for kindergarten, that 90-10 for kindergarten, I recognize the concern. And so that, again, that's why today's informational more than asking you to take action on that, but looking at that recommendation for kindergarten so that we could start with that kindergarten year and that 90-10 model. And then finally, establishing the family committee. So, you know, last year we created a TWE pack, you know, we had our first meeting in December, really exciting, treats, English and Spanish. Anais and I, you know, we tag team the presentation, super psyched. We planned t-shirts for our April meeting with little themes, and then COVID hit. So we've had our BPAC meetings the school year virtually, but the TWE pack we want to get back off the ground. And really, I think we did something similar at the high school with our parent ambassador program, just that recruitment, even within our PTO or PTA, I'm sorry, just that ability for all of our families to work together in those already existing formats, but also creating a committee, more of a committee than what we have currently. So we're just excited about that and would look to do that next year with Mr. Zach as well. So these were the things that we wanted to talk to you about more immediately. So thank you. Any questions?
With the, and I understand tonight we're talking. If we were to implement and do the 90-10 or whatever gets decided as far as that for the incoming kindergarten, I know that, and I understand that part of the recommendations have to do with figuring out the implementation of how do we get people in the program and how do we accept people and what, what does a lottery look like if there's a lottery and how that all works. So how would we, because we don't always know the makeup of our kindergarten class until sometimes leading into August when school is starting, and knowing that we have to make those assignments, how would we be communicating to the incoming kindergarten families what they would be opting for if they if they're of a group of people that get to opt in as opposed to being assigned in because they speak the language enough?
Mhm. So that would be in our communication plan, and I think we would have to look at, so at this point in time, we've had our kindergarten informational nights, and knowing the work of the task force in those kindergarten informational nights, we didn't give us that final specificity of, this percent in English, this percent in Spanish, but really more the belief systems in the program, like the core beliefs of the program. So I think, yes, you're absolutely right, Christy, that would require some back communication with the families that have so far expressed an interest. And in working with Ms. Drake over the last week, looking at some of this data, and this is similar to this point in the school year in preparation for the next year's kindergartners, there's still some unknowns, some incomplete registrations, but based on who's expressed interest, it would look like we would have 3 sections for kindergarten next year opposed to 4, but some years we have had another.
2 years ago, 5.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it just varies, right? So we kind of were looking at their trajectory, but another kind of, not to take a bird walk, but real quick on that is part of the system that we have of the 2 teacher model. You're always looking and hoping to have an even number of sections because of the half a day in English and the half a day in Spanish, and then they switch. So that's always a goal, like even number of sections, even number of sections. Whereas if you go with a model like this, that's 90-10 or 80-20, that's not a factor to be as concerned about because, well, you wouldn't be concerned about that because you would have the one teacher teaching the students all day. So I know that I answered your question first. It didn't.
No,
did help
that
with the
does,
first
because
part?
I know, like, speaking as a first grade 2 parent, 2 years ago, I know that there was, at the kindergarten information night, there was a little bit of a PowerPoint, kind of a rah go tweet. Everybody got excited about it, waiting for that Google form to drop so that we could all, try to get into it. And not really understand, at no point did they really specify like a percentage. And I know at open house that fall, we were, we do bridging and we do both back and forth. I'm just trying to understand how would that communication need to change? I mean, it would have to change in order to, we wouldn't want anyone to feel like we were doing a bait and switch, like, oh, I
Yeah.
understood the program was this. I
Absolutely.
didn't know my kid was going to have 90%
I
Spanish.
totally understand. So I would say that as a result of, again, we're not making
Sure.
tonight's informational, but after our next board meeting, if we were to pursue that change, immediately we'd be able to schedule a parent night for our incoming kindergarten families to explain that.
And when would, since I know it's part of the plan and part of the process, and knowing that our bilingual director is not starting until July. So when would that, I guess, I can't remember how it was placed, how it's put in the presentation, but the needing to define our like admission criteria or process, so that we don't run into a situation of, if we have enough people, but we're not going to tell you how many that is, that we'll need to do a lottery and this is how it'll be. Is that going to be thought out
Right.
now, or is that something
Yeah.
we're going to be figuring out on the fly, hoping to define later?
Yeah.
Just,
So right now, I think there's 42, which is a little higher than this past year, students not completely registered, but who are identify as language learners with Spanish at home. So that's a little bit of a higher number, hence, but that's where we were looking at comparing the numbers and got to the 3 sections for our estimate. But the idea, again, the beauty of this model, I believe, I wasn't here and Dan can speak to it a little more. I believe some of that, okay, how many sections, was a lot related to trying to get to those even numbers, like to have the even number of sections, because you didn't want to add a whole other teacher. I think that was part of the conceptual.
although that year we did end up adding. a
Yeah,
fifth
we did,
section,
no,
so-
I know, but it was on the bubble and it was
Yeah.
like a point of discussion up
Well, and the
until.
idea was not to have a
So-
waiting list. So, but part of that was because there wasn't really an articulated, here are the rules, here's how
Okay.
many we're doing, and this is just how it's gonna be.
Sure.
Because if we define that up front, and that's how it is, then there's not, I
Right.
think that there's less, as a district, we can plan and say, look, we have enough teachers and resources and whatever to have 3 sections, 4
Sure,
sections,
yeah.
whatever. And if we're clear with that approach at the get-go, I think the messaging is gonna be a lot more clear, and we can then plan rather than, again, the idea, and I know I've said this a bunch of times, I'd like us as a district to kind of practice what we preach, trying to be proactive rather than reactive. And I think that that's just a matter of, so I'm just saying, if we're going through it with the goal of trying to do that this fall, I would hope that when it comes to us for action, that is better defined so that we know what the parents are going to be seeing or asking, not specifically the flyer they're going to be seeing, but I mean, just having a plan in mind, that's all.
And right now, when we look at the numbers, the number of homes where English is the primary language, we see that our numbers, I have them on my computer, I apologize, I don't have them in front of me, but are slightly less, like a good, like 10 less than that number 42 I gave you. Now those, we haven't done the model testing with those students to see their Spanish proficiency versus their English proficiency and all those details. But so it looks like that there will, if I had a crystal ball, I would say there probably would need to be a lottery based on the number of students that have Spanish spoken in the home. That's just, again, just based on those rough numbers. So, but yes, we can, I wrote
But
that down.
that anticipates, you're saying there's 40, or whatever the number is, 42, 50, whatever it is, of people who speak Spanish in the home that would automatically be into the program, as opposed to how many spots we'd be letting people in that are not having to be in the program, but that want to be in the program.
And I think we have just under 30 right now. Again, we're still, communication is
course.
always common to be at this point in terms of our communication with, kindergarten family that hasn't started the registration process yet.
Correct.
But under, I want to say around under 30, don't quote me, but of the families that have expressed an interest where they would be on that, in that 50-50 goal, they're on the English side at home.
Okay.
So I'm saying, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think with those numbers that we might not need to have a lottery, but your point's well taken, that we should have that very clear as to what that would look like.
Right.
And then also clear, like in that parent presentation, we could do of what these percentages mean and what that would look like, and what would be the support, what would the support be like for you at home as a parent in terms of like as the homework's coming home and the work's coming home.
Well, and to Wells' point, we can't predict, we can guess, but we can't predict, and we could be wrong. That if we announce and tell everybody it's gonna be a 90-10 program, those 30 possible interested people who, upon hearing that their child, English-speaking child, is going to be taught 90% of the day in Spanish, may say, never mind, we're just gonna go over here, and then that changes. I'm just saying, if we're
It
at
could be
least,
half or it could be double.
it could, yeah, exactly. I mean, and it could be different from year to year.
Yeah.
So I think that there's value
Yes.
in what the recommendations
Absolutely.
are stating, that we need to have that articulated as part of our program, so that we don't have to keep changing the rules each year.
Mhm.
Because I know that was, and I understand we did not make that decision, and that was,
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's a bad decision, but like you said, if we're looking for an even number for the program we have in that first grade class, which again, I acknowledge my son's part of it, but we have 5 sections that now we have to deal with it. So it's not just a 1-year decision, because you've got to be able to support that as they move up. So that's just where, and I appreciate the communication that did a lot of communication that happened in the last, couple of days, and the willingness to have us engage in discussion tonight rather than action. I want to know a little, as many might, I just want, and I appreciate you sharing all of it, but I do want to know a little more information to make sure that as a district, we're going into it again with eyes wide open, so that we can be proactive.
Foster the program and like steady, have it
Yeah.
remain steady and grow.
We want it to last. We don't want it to,
Yeah,
You know,
and
fizzle
I
out.
think
yeah.
2 points that Jamie and I talked about when we were talking was always to look at the bigger picture.
Right.
So while it's great that, you're recommending a new parent committee in this area, let's look at the bigger picture. So we also have some other components that currently exist that try to deal with family communication. Are they successful? Again, I was using it as an example,
Mhm.
Jamie, not telling you, not getting on the dance floor, but just as an
Yeah.
example of, I don't need to know how you measure their success, but, knowing that you are and making adjustments to those roles and programs is what I think we all want to hear. And then again, I was really impressed when you guys were talking about the interconnection. So hearing about the work with Dale and how this is coming in, because I think in my 2 years, and maybe even before that, you know, I never had the full picture. It always seemed like we were dealing in niches
In a
and
vacuum.
silos.
Each thing was in a vacuum
You know,
rather than.
and so that's really
Yeah, helpful.
nice, yeah, nice to hear. And then kind of back to Christie's point and as well is let's set ourselves up for success.
Right.
We're looking at changing start times, we're looking at returning from COVID, we're looking at a lot of, you guys are looking, I'm not putting myself with you guys are doing it. And just, I would just really caution you to set yourself up for success. So you have the time and you need to prepare this as well as any other program that you're making changes to, whether it's start times, busing, whatever, that would be my only ask, that you guys really give yourself the time you need. And maybe that might end up being part of what you're saying, but then the long-term plan of the next year will have more. So that would be what I was hoping to say.
Yeah.
Well, and to add one more point to that too, it's not, I mean, everybody in the district in the fall is gonna be looking at, you know, it's gonna be parents dealing with whatever's coming back. It's gonna be old staff dealing with, starting, you know, you don't know exactly what that's
Kids
gonna
who
look like.
haven't been
Right.
together for so long and maybe
Right.
have, you know, there's gonna be whole
There'll be
other
houses in the fall. I'm
set
not,
of issues
yeah.
that we don't even know what
Yeah.
might happen, you know, so.
Yeah.
What is gonna be the cap for students before there is a lottery? I keep hearing, like, is there a number? Is there a cap?
So
that-
we want to match the number of students who are identified as bilingual learners in terms of when they're registering, they're marking up more than one language is spoken in the home. And then we have the model testing, we have a conversation with the parent, or they directly enroll in TWE. They could also just directly self-elect and go to the website and sign up for TWE, but otherwise for the ones that don't, we have a we're calling and kind of having that conversation to explain it. And so based off those numbers, we want to try to match those numbers then in English, and that drives the sections. So like with the, so if there were 60, then you would try to find 60 students that were English, where English was spoken at home, or even another language that wanted to be part of this. Interested.
Got it.
Yeah.
So if we're doing 90% of the content in Spanish, does that then become what was the old bilingual criteria where the number of students in the classroom needs to be lower than the typical classroom?
Great question, Wells. No, because this is a dual language program, so
Okay,
based on the
just
foundational
checking.
dual component of that kind
For
of.
those of us that are old, that
Yeah,
was-
no,
that
okay.
was-
But conceptually, if I can just put on my, you know,
Yeah, put on your other hat.
little
Yeah.
special ed hat, so it's about the least restrictive environment, which is a term we use so much
Yeah,
in special education
Yes, it
because we
is.
want to expose our students. So it's a very similar thought process with our bilingual students that we're able to have that immersion and exposure. And so the dual language program is the best practice gold standard program for students who
Yes.
are English learners. So yeah, so
that's
that.
why we adopted it 5 years ago.
Yes,
We just
exactly.
didn't
So that helps with that
execute very
exposure. David, is there anything you wanted to add to that? I apologize. You're on line, so I forget.
No, yeah, you responded perfectly to it. Yeah.
well. Okay, and so then how many staff members do we currently have that could be a single teacher? 90-10, 80-20, whatever.
And
And-
for next
with
year.
the PDLs as.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, we have
in
quite a
Whatever grade
few.
we adopt, whatever low.
We have quite a few, so I would have to get back to you to give you an exact
No,
number, but
I
I've been
don't need
looking
the
at that
exact
with Tina and with, because it would impact the philosophical conceptual like framework of how this would all map out. We
Yeah.
work closely with Stephanie and her building and,
Right,
and then we know, retirement's coming up in the next 5 years, and so how would that
Yeah.
implicate like an opening for another teacher and
right.
movement? So we have looked at the PELs and we definitely have enough to sustain that. Like if you look at as it would go up in K through 2, I didn't, and we kind of made projections forward again, assuming that those incoming hires would then have the PEL moving
Yeah.
forward. But we have enough staff right now, absolutely, to run it in kindergarten. We could maintain our same staff and run it in first grade and in second grade. And then I think at that point, we'd have to make sure that one or two people that we've hired had had it. If that
Okay.
makes sense.
Yeah. So for those of you thinking longer term and negotiations, think about that.
One more question. I think you touched on it. I just want to make sure that it gets answered because it may have been when we talked. One of my first concerns in looking at it was thinking about it as a parent of an English learning child who might be going into that program, since I have a first grade student. How does this 90-10 model for an English native speaker, how does that impact their ability to learn to read? If, let's just say, they don't already know how to read English when they start kindergarten, as most do not. Does this affect that? And can you talk about that a little, please?
Sure. So the foundational literacy aspects, I think Wells, you referred to it earlier about how the young children are like sponges for language and that cognition and that ability to transfer. I remember when my little guy was little, he said like a sentence that had Italian, English, and Spanish, and he was in kindergarten. I was like, oh, this is the best thing ever. But so there's those components in terms of that transfer. And so by maintaining that 10%, that would be for those foundational pieces, and we're always modeling that transfer. Again, we've seen the success in programs that have run a 90-10 or an 80-20. We've seen that success in long term. Something escaped me that I wanted to say. Dr. Nieto, do you want to kind of chime in? And I'm going to think of what I lost part of my response there, but.
I missed the question. If you don't mind to summarize it to me.
Yeah, the question was, if you're a parent of a student who is where your home and English is spoken, so the English dominant student, the acquisition of English, like what is the drawback? Is there an impact? While you're thinking, I remembered my other part was that when we're out in society and we're at the stores and we're communicating and we sign up for swim or AYSO soccer, a lot of those components are in English, so that some submersion of English outside of that school day also helps keep with that catch up of that English piece in terms of that acquisition. So David, I kind of answered in a more informal way, but I know you're more of a research guru, so.
Yeah, but you were going in the right direction. I mean, language works like an iceberg. So we go a little piece, and for a long time, right, we can observe the two peaks separate, but there's an underlying component that is called the common underlying proficiency. So language is not learned separately, right? But we store it in the brain in the same category, so to speak, in the same box. And what happens is that the concepts of print, for example, learning Spanish, transfer to English. But that's on top of that, right? And Ms. Ricardo was talking about that, about how the exposure to English is greater actually outside of the school. So outside of the school, students are going to be 100% exposed to English. But on top of that, that 10% of instruction is to ensure that students make those connections, because these are connections that also Spanish-speaking students need as well. So because they may be less exposed to English. So that's exactly the role of the 10% in the first stage, then the 20% in the second stage, and so on and so forth. So there is absolutely no proof that there's any delay actually in English literacy for both group of students, which, to be honest, is quite normal in the English-speaking students, right? That in terms of outcomes, for example, when they get tested in third grade, they actually do not show lower outcomes, but Spanish-speaking students show greater outcomes in those same tests, you know, that as we compare them to Spanish-speaking students in other types of programs.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Freddie, since if you don't mind me putting you on spot, since you represented in our task force, is there anything that you would want to?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple of things just from, I mean, Christy and Lisa, we all made really good points, but I'm totally glad we're not voting on it today, because I think this is a good, you know, talking point that we've been doing for the last hour plus. So a couple of things that I noticed, there's a lot of recommendations, and I think we totally need to look at this long term, right? There's a lot of moving parts. We just hired Zach. Dr. Nieto, you were great with the entire, you know, task force. So, you know, having that piece there with Zach, and then just looking at how this program is going to be it's not being redone, but, you know, Jamie answered one of our questions, basically, that every, you know, 4 or 5 years, you should, you know, look at your programs and try to revamp them or make them better. So looking at that, but Dr. Neto was great as far as, what I liked the most was he got input from everyone. It really was a whole team effort. It wasn't, and Jamie alluded to it, right? I mean, the meetings that we had, it was breakout sessions, but then it was everybody talking together on what's best. So hearing from the parents, from subject matter experts, right? I'm not a teacher, I'm not an educator, but hearing the teachers on what they're lacking in the classroom and how they can make this program better, I think that helped Dr. Nieto and, you know, Jamie, you know, figure out what the recommendations were gonna be. So from that aspect, I think it was done correctly. You know, I will say, I guess my biggest thing is, you know, the sustainability of this program for the next 5, 7, 10 years is gonna be important, A, to follow the recommendations, fine tune them, right, based off of our conversations today. And then 2, really educating our parents. I think that's a big deal. You know, myself being a bilingual learner as a young kid, you know, sometimes it's, you know, the parents just don't really, they either are not, if they're not told, they're not ones to come out and ask a ton of questions, right? Again, I came from a Spanish speaking household, so my parents weren't the first ones to try to get more information on these types of programs. So really, you know, getting as much information to our community and our parents, I think is gonna be very important. And setting this up for success and understand, and having everyone understand, A, why we're doing it, similar to what Christy said, and, you know, what our end goal is, which is obviously to create, you know, better education for all of our kids.
I thought of one more clarification question that I forgot to ask. When you said that the recommendations for the middle school would be a 70-30 allocation, 70% in English, does that envision, like thinking about my 2 middle schoolers, what part of their day do you envision being the Spanish part if they were?
That's a great question. That's a great question. So right now in the language arts, so again, we've been doing a lot of work and conversation on that, right? But again, not finalized yet, because that will happen after this coming school year. So
just the idea.
But the concept would be in that social studies, language arts block that we now call ELA. It'd be like ELA, FLA, social studies, right? Spanish language arts, English language arts. So that's a really great place. That's in our conversations in the task force, we talked a lot about that. In my conversations with Mark and Mark's team, we've talked a lot about that, and that's really where we're honing in on. I have shared a few times that in my experience, which I really thought was pretty cool, is like in Highland Park, where I was a teacher, we had we had PE sections taught in Spanish, which was a really neat additive component to. And then you're learning more like action words. Right. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, you can also look at enhancing it with specials and things like that as well.
Thank you.
But yeah, in that block.
Just understanding. Yeah, I understand it's not a.
Great.
So having been at these meetings more than once and having had a parent who was from a Spanish speaking household say that they want their child to learn English as quickly as they can. How do we address that?
Are you asking more like in terms of if we were to switch to a 90-10 or an 80-20 opposed to a 50-50, or just in general?
In general.
In general? Okay, so David, I'm totally gonna let you answer, but I'm just share one component, because this is in my years as an educator, especially the 8 years that I've taught in a classroom, I would have, and I know I'm dating myself because I'm old, so that was like 20 years ago when that started, but parents would come and say that, and we really, we try to, speaking of education and that understanding, again, it's a parent's personal choice, and they can always elect to even have their child not in bilingual programming and those kinds of components, the whole process. But I really try to encourage, at minimum, have that conversation around, this is such an asset. It's such a value for your child to grow up knowing, having both languages. And so embrace that and support it, and, feel good about it. Like, you should be proud of your language. And a lot of the other recommendations that we have, like kind of talking about, signage in the buildings, or like celebrating both languages, or having PD in both languages. The more, normalcy is not really the word I'm looking for, but the more celebration around both languages that we can do, and like elevate them up and show that they're both equal and awesome, the more helpful that is for the parents to understand we value their language. And so that's with like our bilingual parent advisory committee and things like that as well. But just really, setting the stage, like, analogies of yeah, I had aspirations for my career. I'll tell you what, the fact that I spoke Spanish, that's why I get to stand here and work with all of you today, right? You know, so that it's such an asset to our children to have those languages. So we're constantly preaching that, but it's ultimately the parents' decision.
Okay.
Yeah, David, you have more of a you could probably, that was more of a passionate answer and not really a scientific one, but go ahead, sorry, David.
No, it's great, and I love being in part of this meeting and discussing these topics. You know, first of all, to be honest, typically when Spanish-speaking families come up with this kind of argument, there's the elephant in the room that we need to acknowledge. And one is that they've been subjected to racism and discrimination because of their language, and they don't want their children to go through the same. That's typically what happens. I mean, let's consider this. How many of us right here would say, I don't want my children to speak English, even if we lived in a foreign country? I don't think that no one here would say, I don't want my kid to speak English, right? The other way around, I would say, I want my kid to speak English. And then, yeah, they can speak German or Chinese, Japanese, or whatever the language is in the country that I am. Unfortunately, in our country, this happens, and linguistic discrimination is a fact, not only here, it happens elsewhere, but this is a situation that we have to deal with. So the first conversation that I would have with this family is two. On the one hand, especially if their children are entering school, I would tell them that this seems counterintuitive, but the reality is that more exposure to English does not mean faster acquisition. And there's plenty of data to report on that. So it's marginal. But on top of that, if we look long-term outcomes of students that learn to read in their first language first, Spanish in this case, they had better acquisition rates of English, you know, from third grade on. And this is consistent across all the data in the state, including in Chicago Public Schools. That actually was the most recent study in dual language, and is publicly available. It was actually the Institute of American Research that did the study with Chicago Public Schools, and that data is consistent. And again, it may not seem reasonable, right? It's logical. It tells you the more you're exposed to English, the better, the faster you acquire. And that's not really so. Initially, yes, there's an advantage in a curve, but we have to remember that language acquisition is not linear either. And this is the response, that's why this happens. So initially, our learning curve of any language is like this, right? Because we learn very fast. But little by little, when we reach a level of 3 or 4, in which the acquisition gets harder, we are learning deeper now, this curve flattens. What happens is that those students that are able to manage 2 languages at that time start to increase and go above that initial advantage that those students had in a position. So I would advise those parents to, I wouldn't tell them the first part, but I would reason through them, actually, this will be better for your children, both in terms of English and also in terms of academic acquisition content.
And maybe the better question is, you know, just are parents going to have the ultimate decision and choice with all the information, you know, to make the best choice for their family? So if you have a Spanish-speaking parent and an English-speaking parent, it's their job to work it out and decide with their child, with your advice, with every, you know, whatever inputs they have. So I think maybe that's the bigger question, that there's a place for every child, depending on what their parents feel or their guardians feel is best for their family, their situation.
And that was another thing I wanted to, even though the recommendation is to kind of increase the signage and make it clear that we are a dual language district, that in no way are we intending to convey to the families who don't choose to do the dual language or who aren't able to get into it even if they want it, that we're not at all trying to minimize the value of the education for those English only learners either.
Correct.
We just want to make it welcoming for everybody and do that together. So
Yeah, I like that, the way that you explain that, absolutely. All right, well, thank you, guys. Thank you, Dr. Newsom. Thank you. Oh,
Thank
okay, you
you.
had another question. I'm like, wait, okay, thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Okay, we're moving to the superintendent's report. The first agenda item in my section is the Special Recreation Association of Central Lake County agreement that we have for the Century Room in Washington. The resolution or agreement is in there to terminate that agreement we had with them. Main reason was the use of facility. The space used to be an office space, so if that gives you an idea of roughly how big it is, it's really made for about a desk and a couple of chairs, small table. Even prior to the pandemic, the use of it by our own district staff was not at the levels that we would have anticipated, because there was more of a logistical piece to it, because really the only staff and students that could access it easily were at Washington. In order to be able to have anybody else have access, we needed to bus them, and our schools and our staff were creative in finding different ways to be able to meet students' needs without needing to transport. And then knowing and talking with their director, they were looking to have more utilization for it. And they felt they had other options as well that could be better utilized, where they could have access to the facility during more times during the day. So we were in mutual agreement with parting ways. So the request is for the board to approve that termination of that agreement.
So is there an exchange of $10,000 going one way or the other? I read that twice, but I don't understand it.
So we had the invoices to where we are paying them back for that equipment, because we had purchased it, they had purchased it for the room themselves. So we had it, so now we're actually giving it back to them. So it's a switch, actually, because we had initially had, they had paid us. Let me get that right.
I,
We got the.
Well, okay, so I'm glad I'm not the only one that's confused. Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Are they getting the equipment?
Yeah,
Okay.
We are
They bought the
reimbursing them, according to the agreement that you gave to us, we are reimbursing them for the cost that they spent to upgrade the room with outlets and the construction that they did
Oh,
to
is
the
that what
room,
that's?
which we get to keep the construction
Yes.
updates. They're pulling out the fixtures and leaving,
Okay.
they're.
but, or the items that are in the room. I know we
Yeah.
did a tour, so there's, you know,
Yeah,
carpets and
yeah,
rugs.
there's a
and-
whole bunch of stuff.
They're bringing that out because they
Okay.
paid for that.
Okay.
They initially paid money for the improvements to the room
Okay.
that essentially we get to keep, because we'll still have all the outlets and
Yeah.
whatever.
Right.
But we are paying them for that because that was part of the original agreement, that if on a mutual exchange, they would have to give us the receipts, which they did, and we saw them in
Yeah, we
the packet, to quantify what that was. And that's what we're doing. So we're just satisfying the agreement that was entered into, I think, in 2014, 16, whatever it was. That was my question was, I guess I'm kind of sad to see that we only gave it 2 years, and I get that this last year was COVID impacted, but hopefully it's not going to be in the future. But I understand if there were lots of other impacts to it that didn't make it work for both parties. And I also understand that we have a lot more need for some space at Washington, so maybe it can be utilized in other ways. But I know prior, I know it was like a pull-out room for
Right.
social emotional and stuff, so before.
The second item that I have is the school calendar for this current school year. This is an annual, so essentially what we need to be able to do is remove the emergency days and then submit that calendar to the ROE for approval, which goes to the Illinois State Board of Education. Purpose is to document the days that we did have students in attendance to make sure we're meeting the minimum requirements. So in the calendar, we did remove the emergency days. We did update the graduation date that was originally on there, so that's also reflected accurately. The form that's actually submitted to the state does look different than this, but the dates will be the same. So we'd ask that the board approve the 2021 school calendar to be submitted to the ROE. If by chance something happened which required us to close and modify before we close out the end of the year, we would come back to you and say we would need to do an update. Historically, we missed the snow today, so hopefully nothing else happens.
And this is part of what we do every year by doing the final. This year, we've just had an unusual number of changes throughout the year, but we always do one around this time of year
Yes.
anyway.
Yep.
And since this was a minor update, that's why the formatting is still the same as the one we've had all year, for those listening and knowing that I always ask about that. We changed it on the future 2 years, but I understand why we didn't change it on the existing one, because it's the
You
existing
were
one.
gonna bring that up.
I didn't want anyone listening who might still be at home listening to think that I didn't forget, but there is a reason. It's not just because we didn't forget. It's
Yep.
basically, it's just a final draft of this year's calendar.
And all the ones in the future will have the weeks.
I wasn't complaining is what I said. I didn't say I was
I know.
gonna bring it up. I wasn't complaining or expecting a change. Thank you.
So the next item then is a follow-up from the previous board meeting. Policy 680, teaching about controversial issues, topic that Wells brought forward. Wanting to confirm that our school board policy was updated and was aligned to the policy that Wells had. We did go into the policy, and ours is current and aligns with that policy that Wells had seen also. So ours was updated as of March of 2020. So that's in place. And I think the two things that we're going to touch base, at least in regards to the policy. So what would that look like? How would this process go with a controversial issue coming forward? And as it relates to curriculum. So looking at policy 640. So what would happen there is if we look to adopt or make a recommendation to the board to update a book or a reading that could be controversial. What we do in adoption of a book that we're going to require students to read, all those need to come to the board for approval. So we'd go through those with you as a board and make sure that we're acknowledging that this one might be controversial, or if you go through one of them and you see, hey, what about this? That's one of the triggers that we'd have for curriculum wise to make sure if we have potentially controversial issues within our materials, we're able to address that then. And that would mean either we'd acknowledge that it is, and here's some of the waivers we could do with saying, parents, we'd notify you that this is going to be taught. And if you weren't comfortable with that, we would then give them an alternate assignment for their child. So in regards to the content, what we just got into. So the content piece, typically this one happens really more around health education, where we need to give parents notification when we're going to talk about reproduction. So in those cases, we send notices home to families that this unit's coming up. We understand it can be sensitive. Please let us know if you are okay with your child being in the unit or not, and then providing some type of an alternative. Because we are required in that case to provide that lesson. So in those cases, that's how we try to address when we think we're in a spot where we're in an area where a parent might be upset with the topic coming forward. Now, outside of the policy, parents may find a topic that they don't feel comfortable having their children participate in. Those are more individualized. In those cases, the principals do work with the parents and try to find if there's a common ground, and if there's not, being able to find an alternate lesson also to be able to work with the families in those certain situations. So those are three examples of what we do try to do to address policy 680 and how that takes place with either the development of curriculum or in the content when it's being taught in the classroom. Okay. And the next couple items are follow-ups also from the last meeting. So Lisa and I did get a chance to meet to go over some of the items, just wanted to go over for upcoming board meetings. Policy 2150 deals with committees. So Lisa, hand it off to you to be able to go through that, or you want me to do a quick overview?
You can keep going and I can pipe in when
Okay.
I want.
So knowing that we've got a couple things coming up, it's being able to identify the new board members that will be in committees. Plus tonight, we're talking about the equity committee. We brought up policy 2150, which outlines the committees for boards. And there's special board committees that they have, which we would look to have the equity committee be part of that one, which list in there. And there's also the standing board committees that take place. So which researches the policies and issues and information recommended to the board. So that committee would be composed to be confirmed after the new board set for that one. What we would look to do is incorporate the equity policy committee as one of those standing committees that we have. And so right now of the standing committees, there's the board policy committee, the parent teacher advisory committee, and then the Behavioral Interventions Committee, Finance Committee, and the Shared Services Committee. Those are the ones that we have all the time. Now, I'm going through this. It's clear that we haven't had this past year, our Parent Teacher Advisory Committee and our Behavior Interventions Committee. So that's one we need to get resurrected and going again. The one thing that we are looking into, and it appears that we can, is that Parent Teacher Advisory Committee and the Behavior Intervention Committee, they're connected. So one of the options that does exist is to be able to combine those into a committee. What would need to happen is in the description, it would need to clearly define that second step of, if we're saying the Behavior Intervention Committee, that needs to take place also. So just identifying that, but you could still have one body, one committee do the entirety of that work.
And it kind of looks like our policy has that now, so in committee 3, the last sentences, at the board president's discretion, the parent-teacher advisory committee shall perform the duties assigned to the behavioral. So we kind of have it in there. That's the way we want to continue, because we thought that's the way it had been done in the past. Maybe you guys have perspective on it.
How often is this committee generally convening, and for only when there's
But I would think it
issues, or
would
for
make
what
sense, we
purpose?
could just call the parent teacher advisory committee and just within the description of it,
Yeah.
you handle behavioral intervention. That
Mhm.
would have been the next.
Because it is by statute, 2
Yeah, so you have
different
certain-
requirements. It's
You have
just-
certain statutes that you have to have.
Yeah.
As long as we're legally allowed to do that.
And that's what the lawyer feedback said that we could provide, and that's probably why we have that last sentence that. we did.
And in reality, I think, has that group not been the PTA committee? at
We have a
certain
PTO,
times?
it's in our district, yeah, I don't know, is that ours? Is that the committee, or?
Have they not looked at the discipline and the behavioral
That,
interventions?
that seems just odd to me that the purpose of that group would get involved with.
If you can find another group of folks
People
that are
who wanna
willing to
do
come out,
it,
it
I
would be my
guess.
guess, but I'm just telling you, I think that's who it's been.
They have done that in the past.
Yes.
So recent years, it has been a separate committee.
Okay, cool.
Set up.
So duration, Christy asked how long, usually it's about this time of year, we start initiating that, to start looking through the student handbooks and making sure that it's in compliance with any updated policies that we have in regards to behavior, or if there's anything that the school wanted to change, the committee would go through that then. So you'd think now it needs to be, the committee would need to be done by May, because that usually means printing of books. So typically you're talking 2 to 3 meetings, depending on the length. Most of the books are pretty much already established, or at least policy practices. So it's really kind of just making sure it's.
Well, and if I recall correctly, the last few years, we haven't printed it, we just provide the link when they finish registration, which has actually already been done for a lot of people. It's just a link, it's a page with a bunch of links on it that comes up.
Yep.
And unless you save them, you don't have them, but then people don't necessarily know about them, so maybe we need to put them on the website or something once we get to that point, but maybe that's a job for that committee.
No, it's staff job.
No, I mean deciding,
No.
okay,
So we would look to be able to then, I think what we're saying is, and we're in agreement that we would still list them that way, but we'd still know that it's one committee doing both those.
Yeah, it could be, certainly.
Yes. Okay. And then the other appointments piece, what we have listed there is the STEAM Foundation, the IASBO resolution portion, which is appointment, CEDAW, and the Village of Mundaline. So those aren't committees per se, they're more appointments of what we want to go and follow up on as far as being active as board members. So those are the items that we need to look at for the next board meeting, of who might be interested in filling some of those roles, if people want to move around to different positions in regards to the appointments. So it's something to be able to think about.
Where would negotiations a committee, or is that?
That's an appointment.
If it was, I would see it's probably the one, it's defined.
Could be a
time
special board
period,
committee.
Special.
Right, well,
Just
on the
special board
last
committee,
Special board committee.
Because it
comes
only
up,
happens
temporary committee,
periodically.
right.
It's
Yeah.
not the standing committee.
but on the
So that'd be
last,
defined as special board.
Yeah.
on the last board meeting, we picked 3 people, so that it's just a matter of where we put it so that we don't forget that.
Well, we wouldn't need to list it under special board committees.
Yes.
Okay. The one suggestion, we're talking about any other appointments, just be able to provide some kind of a descriptor for each of those other appointments. So the individuals would know what would be expected and like the time commitment for each of those appointments, of being able to do that. So we would look to be able to.
Just to sign them. And you volunteered to.
Well, as I recall, at the last board meeting, we just went around, who wants to do this, and they got
Much,
Yeah, right.
established, yeah.
So yeah, we were talking about, do we need to state this formally somewhere? Well, it's not a policy, but maybe everybody, whoever's done it last can just fill in the new people when it involves, because you did his IAS.
Yeah, the IASB, I've done that for 2 years, yeah.
Rob's done this, the village, Kevin's done, CEDOS.
Okay, so we'll leave it up to the board members as they go around to select those, then to kind of give a description of what that entails. To clarify. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, you want me to reach out to Nikki to see if they want a board member? I mean, maybe they don't want a board member, and then I think there was some talk about their charter might need to be amended if
It currently includes it, I
we can
believe.
provide one.
Right.
So I'll
Well, let's put it this way, find out if they want one. I don't think we should determine at this point that we can't provide one.
No, I
because,
know.
I mean,
I'm not sure they're not gonna say no, but,
well, I mean, the question is, if they would like one, then we will do our best to provide one, because that's something that has historically been there, but, we'll figure it out.
Last area to discuss then is the follow-up also on the equity committee. So this is for discussion and action. So in that summary report, we did bring back to the board the committee structure that you wanted to implement for the equity committee. That's in there. So the recommendation is tonight to go ahead and approve that committee structure.
Actually, I know I saw it somewhere, but it's not. It's not after the committees.
Yeah, I'm not looking
So
forward to.
where the heck?
I'm going
I
down.
swore I saw it.
Equity committee,
Yeah.
all the way.
We're just
Go
looking
down
for
to the
what page in
bottom.
the board packet is.
Okay.
that's all.
go down to the bottom of the admin reports. It should be bolded in bolded equity committee.
Where is it?
What page is it?
It's on the bishop report. I'm sorry.
I'm looking at the 186 whole.
Yeah, the 186 page job. What page is it?
Page.
Approximately. The PDF.
Here, I'll do
Is there a way to,
find,
I'm not sure what admin report, so
find equity. No, that's.
I know I saw it.
I know,
Where it is.
it must have been up before all of this, because this is now.
Oh, I got, it's on page 5
5?
of 186.
Okay,
Okay,
well, that would be why we can't find it, when we're all looking at hundreds.
yeah.
Yes, it's on page 5
Okay,
and 6.
Hi, George. There it is. Okay,
We want to talk about numbers. I mean,
so do people have, do
we've
people
got
read this?
11 really good people. Do we want to say sorry to one because we said no more than 10? I mean, how constraining is this? Or would that be up to the committee to change at some point?
Well, if they have, somebody that's just dying to get on, they can come back and Again, so other people can attend, they just wouldn't be necessarily a
Okay,
quote voting member,
got it.
right?
Yeah,
I mean, again, if, from that point of view. And then if they want to become a voting member, and the rest of the board wants to change the process and the policy, you change it to 11.
So in looking at how this was set up.
Yeah.
I can see that if you've got the superintendent or another, or another administrator, up to 8 staff members and 2 board members, that's approximately 10. So I think the idea is making sure that there's not an imbalance in terms of how many voting committee members you have compared to the rest of the committee,
And I think.
which makes sense, but I guess the question is, do we only want 2 members of the board? But that's hard to determine today when we don't have
Yeah.
all of the board,
Right.
the new board
It
seated. I think
depends
that's a
on
discussion.
interest and ability to dedicate the time.
Right. I like the way that it's written where it says 2 or more. That way it gives us the ability to, at our reorg meeting, decide how many.
Yeah, fine, that's.
I don't have a problem with it. It's written. Now, it's just throwing it out there, how, it doesn't say, and so does this mean, if it doesn't say that that would just be up to the, who decides who the members of the community to get put on, who decides the voting
I
members?
think that's needs to be worked out.
Okay.
So I would think,
I mean, I'm thinking in
Yeah.
terms of other boards that I've been on, you have, like, you've got 5, you have like 5 2-year terms or something, so that they rotate every couple, so that you're not having the same people always on, or,
yeah, because we had all those details from the other policy we originally were looking at. I think rather than get too prescriptive at this point,
Yeah.
perhaps the board members that at the start of the core group and to work with administration around
or to determine like
process.
regulations or not regulations, I'm trying to think of like governing rules or something.
Staggered terms.
Well, I think what she's saying is let the 2 or more board members at the Board of Education, the superintendent, the building staff people, kind of create the governing rules of that committee in order to determine how to pick those committee members and what have you.
Yep. How do they apply
It's the
to-
board members and then,
Well, I mean, like the staff members, I would think would be chosen by the administration rather than, or ask for volunteers or something. So we're not charged with picking staff members.
we could, if we want, I mean, yeah. We could say, hey, somebody that hasn't been involved could get prior, I don't know.
So I guess the question is, how detailed do we want to make
Yeah.
this as a board committee?
I get this point.
If we can get to this with some sort of membership, I think we'd be doing well, and whether it's,
Yeah.
you could make the case whether or not it's people that the superintendent invites or somebody else, that's one thing, and or is it union membership? I don't
Selected
know.
by the years.
Ask them. I would let,
The goal, I think we can all agree, is a cross-section, not to have anyone, that's why it says from one from each building at least, so that you don't have all one member, all one building representative, not another. I think the fear is getting too detailed at this point because
Yeah.
we don't want to limit. And if it's a board committee, if we find that we need to change the parameters, I imagine we could bring it up and do that at a future point, correct?
Just throwing it out there, he's not here, but what if Dave wanted to join? I would be perfectly, think that would be great, so again, where the interest is in kind of getting maybe some non-traditional voices heard, I think that's kind of
But not
why it's
feeling like we need
wide
to
and not
establish that.
narrow, yeah.
So as we get into developing it, I use the example of the interview committee that we did for the Assistant Soup for Teaching and Learning. I reached out to the union leadership and asked them to get at least one member from Lincoln, because it's a small school, and then 2 members from every building. And primarily certified staff, because this was for a certified position that they're primarily dealing with. We would do something similar and working with our union staff to get for our certified staff. We'd want to get our non-unionized staff, some representation in there as well. And then when it comes to working with our families, what I suggest is we go to working with our parent liaison, Jorge Makata, and talking with our principals that who they know that's in around the building, or at least they could reach out to. And then finally, we talk to our PTO. And we use those as the resources to determine or get the avenues of communicating out for people that would show any interest.
We could
And then we could go. from there.
solicit community from our website. We could, like you said, the liaisons, there's the PTO. Resource.
Could someone let me in the door, please?
Coming.
Coming.
That's we all good.
I think so. I mean, it's a start.
I think it's a start, and I think
Yeah.
it's good that it's kind of general and you can make a ton of adjustments.
Super specific.
And then just while we're on the topic, I was hoping Christy and I could give you just a really small update on, and if anybody else has done any reading, anything they'd like to recommend. Personally, Christy and I'll let Christy talk more about what we've done together, but I put out again 2 web seminar things that I attended that had to do with facilitating civil discussions among people that disagree. I didn't write it down, but it was the best quote from the last one that I attended. The gentleman said, "Beloved communities do not agree." And it was all about how you can be a beloved community, but not have the same opinion on different things. And how do you constructively talk to each other with coming from that place that, yes, we are all a beloved family or community is the way you put it. And so that I found that message, that line alone was a nice takeaway. And then I'll segue to Christy. I originally was interested in attending these lectures, and it was about,
I think it's threading the needle, the survival of Jews in the diaspora.
yeah, this was basically, it talked about how they're using the Jewish culture as the touch point, but then it branches into other areas and other cultures. But basically, how have cultures through history survived and adapted, and the mechanisms to do that have been very different in different situations. And so I'm attending it not just because we were talking originally way back about assimilation versus, and things like that, but just because it was a historical type of class that interested me. And
Yeah, that's a 4-week program, but we missed tonight. So
it's being recorded.
I will, yeah, we'll watch
we
it
could-
in our spare time.
It's more of a conversation, basically, with.
And we are both the youngest ones.
We're
in
the
group
youngest
class.
ones there. I think I might be the only non-Jew in the class, but it's been very interesting. So hopefully we can have some takeaway points that we can share with you. Again, it was very fascinating how cultures can opt to preserve their culture, and some of it is actually counterintuitive that, do you isolate or do you integrate to preserve your culture? Because you don't, traditionally back in the day, if the Greeks were fighting the Romans and you lost, well, unless you assimilated, your culture kind of got destroyed. So it's kind of interesting, and all the different varying degrees of how the conquering culture may integrate the attributes from the culture they just conquered, and vice versa, and how civilizations kind of evolve like that and blend or not and
Or
maybe
not,
disappear. Yeah.
Or sometimes not, and then that's how they survive.
Yeah,
Like I said, it
yeah.
kind
So
of
it was very
changes. Yeah.
interesting, the strategies of cultural survival is kind of we talked about.
I don't have. anything else.
And you are the youngest person. in the
You are as well. They're
Yeah,
all
well, I'm not
far
one.
older than both of us, yes.
But they were very warm and
Very nice
welcoming.
people.
It was it was a group that seems to have learned together
For about 14 years, they
14
said,
years,
from
maybe.
across the country.
Yeah,
So they might, and they've all figured out Zoom, mostly.
it was very nice.
Cool.
So yeah, if anybody else comes across interesting things, even if it's tangential or not, just let us know. 'cause I'm
I
trying
watched
to
a program the other night about Native peoples and their bringing back their language and their activities and whatnot. So,
'cause, yeah,
quite
at
sure
one
why
point,
I
I
got ended up
considered
with that,
becoming an anthropology major
anyway.
and like I'm still fascinated by the Mayan culture and what, you know, what happened to them or what didn't happen to them anyway. It was kind of interesting.
so anyway,
Welcome, Kevin.
thank you. Alrighty.
I just continue. I'm sorry. I kind of got, you know, you're here now.
Are we on the consent agenda? Is that where
We are on the
We
consent
are on the
agenda.
quiz. Okay, does anybody desire an item to be removed, tabled for further discussion? Now would be the time to say so from the consent agenda. Nope, we're good. Okay. Do I have to say something special?
I think we just make a motion.
somebody needs to move. I move the approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
Price.
Aye.
I'm gonna keep track of the minutes this week. Okay, Erickson.
Aye.
Okay, Fingerhut, aye. Gallegos.
Aye.
Holly.
Aye.
Dupont.
Aye.
St. Clair.
Aye. All right, next up, we have the motions. Now, do I need to motion that we postpone the first motion?
No,
No.
I think we just-
you just don't do anything.
There's no call.
Got it. Okay.
I move the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to terminate the intergovernmental agreement as presented with the Special Recreation Association of Central Lake County and Mundelein Elementary School District 75 effective June 30th, 2021.
Second.
Erickson.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Holly.
Aye.
Dupont.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. St. Clair.
Aye.
I move the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the final 2020-2021 school calendar as presented.
Second.
With St. Clair, Erickson.
Aye.
St. Clair.
Aye.
Holly.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Dupont.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Price.
Aye.
I move that the Board of Education of Mundelein School District 75 approve the creation of an equity policy committee as defined and presented.
Second.
St. Clair.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Price.
Aye.
Dupont.
Aye.
Erickson.
Aye.
No.
All right, that's the motion. So the Board of Education meeting will now adjourn and enter into executive session at the time of 9:26. Please call the roll.
I think you have to say why we're going.
Oh, I'm sorry. The board will enter into executive session to discuss the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee of the public body or against legal counsel for the public body to determine its validity. Discussions of minutes of meetings lawfully closed under the Opens Meeting Act, whether for proposed approval by the body of the minutes or semi-annual review of the minutes as mandated.
Second.
Would that be St. Clair making the motion?
Okay.
Motion.
Therefore, motion.
St. Clair.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Holly.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye. Erickson.
Aye.
Dupont.
Aye.
Please, rules.
As long as you got it, that's all. that matters.
Illinois Elementary School District 75 is returned to open session. Will secretary please call the roll?
Holly.
Aye.
St.
Here.
Clair. Here. Aye. Here. Here. Gallegos.
Said everyone.
Right.
Here.
Figurehead, here. Erickson.
Here.
Dupont.
Here. I move that the Board of Education of Mundelein Elementary School District 75 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the executive session minutes for March 16th, 2021.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Fingerhead, aye. Erickson.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
Dupont.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye.
I move that the Board of Education of Mundelein Elementary School District 75 accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the closed session verbatim records be destroyed as presented after April 20th, 2020.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Price.
Aye.
Erickson.
Aye.
Dupont.
Aye.
Fingerhut, aye.
I move that the Board of Education accept the superintendent's recommendation to approve the following closed session minutes, continue to require confidentiality and are recommended to remain in the closed session file June 16th, 2020, July 14th, August 18th, September 22nd, October 20th, and November 17th, all of 2020.
Second.
Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
St. Clair. Aye. Fingerhut, aye. Erickson.
Aye.
Dupont.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Kevin, can you correct that date? I just noticed it says 2020 when you said it. It should be 2021 for the verbatim.
The first
Said it
one?
after April 20th, 2021.
Okay. Amend that to say 2021 instead of 2020.
Thank you.
We can call the roll again.
Everyone okay with that change?
Does anyone want to change their vote?
Sounds good to me. Okay, I think we're open. President's prerogative. Let me just let you know, I'm not going to give any details because we're in open session, but CEDAL has received a complaint. And it looks like it's going to go to litigation, so that could be coming down the pike. Something that happened in one of the buildings. So just so you know that.
Our building.
It wasn't on the agenda because it wasn't our student, so I didn't bring it up in executive session, but I just wanted to let you know that that's happening. Lisa, do you want to talk about the evaluation process?
Sure. So we were debating whether it would be constructive to have mid-year check-ins, quarterly check-ins, kind of get any better cadence around performance issues. Because we were talking, in general, in other settings, that's kind of, what's recommended practices, since, we don't see, we're not working with you every day, so we don't see you, so if that would be something that we would usually find beneficial of having feedback sessions, rather than one big enchilada at the end of the year, one big.
We've talked to what that would look like. And I would want to make that work.
And whether it could be informal, we could talk about how it works, like you said, it could be informal, it could be formal with a form like we did for the year end, it could be, something less, it could be, whatever. We usually find would be helpful.
I guess we were sort of going back and forth in executive session about a little bit about this, but then we didn't want to get too sidetracked on general questions. We were trying to stay specifically focused on your evaluation. So I guess generally, I'm curious, do you find the tool that we use, do you find that valuable or not valuable, or what can we do to improve upon it? I guess it sort of goes along with what Lisa's saying, like what would you like to see from us? Was this one helpful? Was it not helpful? Just sort of general sort of talk about the evaluation process.
Form is kind of like 2 years old now. We didn't have it.
No,
But we had-
we've adapted this.
We've adapted,
couple times.
okay.
And I adapted it again this year. Like I said, I added,
Great.
I added the one section based on the past year.
Well, I think form wise, it was the intent with the shared services to have the commonalities between the two districts highlighted through the evaluation process. So as far as being able to hit the different areas, I do think the document does that. It's at least for me, I know when I go through it structurally, I've kind of got how I'm trying to document what I'm doing and when to align to that. So I think it's compared to other evaluations that I've had, this one I think is a little bit more descriptive with the different areas that we're looking at for each district. So I think it's definitely better than the ones we've had before, or at least that I've experienced before. I do think it's more specific, more than the numerical rating. The thing I think I find of most value is the feedback that's provided in the comment section. So I do find it of value. If we wanted to do check-ins, I guess just quickly thinking, I think the biggest thing to be able to do is just, even if we use that form, what would be the comments piece would be probably be the most effective. Right? I mean, those things we're looking for, kind of what have you heard or seen up to that point? Being able to help me with guiding where my time's being spent.
Yeah, and if we didn't go to check-ins, then my suggestion to the board would be, keep little notes, because you forget, about something, or, the good thing that happened in September, if you're trying to remember that, and so there's tricks in performance review, halo effects. Do I only focus on the negative? Do I only focus on the positive? Do I, as an evaluator, there's things we can talk about as a group, as a way to approach things.
Yeah, certainly agree. I mean, it's helpful because then also you get to the point where you need to have a final summative.
You've done
all
the work
the work's
all
done
through
already,
the year,
just
yeah.
compile
And you probably do the same thing. I used to make lists of save emails where somebody said I did something right or wrong, or it'd be like, oh yeah, okay. You forget about it over a year, and then it builds a sense of pride, I think, on both sides. So, oh yeah, we did do this, and here's maybe how it could be better, or here's where it was knocked out of the park, and that's all good stuff.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yep. Anyone have anything else for the good of the group?
We're gonna be cake at the next meeting. I'm sorry.
I hope so.
Can we drink?
Bob and I decided we were gonna have a beer.
I was gonna say, what should we bring?
Put Kurt in. Kurt's in. Okay, if there's nothing else, we have a special meeting on the 28th. Correct. Is that a Wednesday?
3 of you are going without us, so we do our meeting.
7 o'clock. Wednesday, 7 o'clock, okay. All right, no other business for the board. I move that we adjourn. Second. Secretary, please call the roll.
Holly.
Aye.
Erickson.
Aye.
Dupont.
Aye.
Fingerhut. Aye. Price.
Aye.
Gallegos.
Aye.
St. Clair.
Aye.
10-14.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, well, you have a lot of signing to do. I've already started.